Hey guys, Dr. Mackey again. This is going to be trauma triage criteria, policy 5053, a little bit of background. This is based off the CDC's criteria, which was developed in about 2013, 14, somewhere around in there. Sitting at the top of the decision tree is a physiologic trauma criteria, GCS less than 14, systolic blood pressure less than 90, respiratory rate less than 10 or greater than 29. These are obviously everything we can measure. So these are objective findings that we have in the presence of trauma. Now, you'll notice everything here says in the policy about transporting to the closest, and I'm going to put appropriate in quotations, trauma center, because that trips some people up. We have specialty criteria for triaging to trauma centers for specialty criteria for burns and for peds. All other trauma centers are considered equal. So it doesn't matter if it's a level 1 or level 2. The only difference between those is if they do research and if they have residents. So the capabilities as far as the specialty services that are offered at each of those is equal. So unless it's a burn or unless it's a kid, they're going to be going to the closest trauma center. Okay, step 2, if they don't have any physiologic criteria, you're going to go to assess the anatomy. So penetrating injuries to the kill zone, this is head, neck, torso, and extremities proximal to the elbows and knees. Penetrating injuries, this is stab wounds and gunshots. They are going to go to these traumas, they're going to go directly to a trauma center. Flail chest, 2 or more proximal long bone fractures, so that can be a humerus and a femur, both humerus, both femurs. Those are going to go to a trauma center. Crushed, degloved, or mangled extremity proximal to the wrist or ankle. Amputations proximal to the wrist or ankle, so that means that an amputated finger does not need to go to a trauma center. May end up there eventually, but doesn't need to go there from the field. Pelvic fractures, again, these are hard to diagnose if you don't have an x-ray machine, but suspicion where someone has got a mechanism with considerable trauma around the pelvis. Open or depressed skull injuries, again, these are also hard. Depressed is a little bit easier than open because a big scalp laceration is hard to tell if it's an open skull injury. Paralysis, that's a little bit more obvious. And tourniquet needed to control extremity hemorrhage. So in this criteria here, you're going to want to take these people to trauma centers. And of course, you would never be wrong in erring on the side of caution. Over triage is expected. What over triage means is that about 30 to 40% of people who go to trauma centers don't need the specialty services of a trauma center. That's an acceptable over triage rate. Under triage rate means that they went to a hospital other than a trauma center and they probably should have gone to a trauma center. And that national standard and local standard is right around 5%. So we should be taking more people to trauma centers that need to go there. On rare occasions, someone who needs to go to a trauma center is not initially going to end up there. So, all right, so we've passed physiologic trauma criteria, anatomic criteria. If the patient doesn't meet any of those, now we go to mechanism of injury. This is where things get a little bit more difficult. So adults that fall 2 stories, so greater than 20 feet, so a 2-story fall. Children greater than 10 feet or 2 times the height of the child. So that could be let's say like someone, say like an older sibling was playing with their 1-year-old brother or sister and thought it'd be fun to take him up on the bunk bed. And the kid falls off the bunk bed. Believe it or not, that meets trauma criteria. You take that kid to a pediatric trauma center, which in this case is UC Davis. High-risk auto crashes, large intrusions, ejections from motorized vehicle or livestock, and then death in the same passenger compartment. So those go to trauma centers. Auto versus ped or bicyclist that is thrown, run over, or with significant impact about greater than 20 miles an hour. Again, that's very hard to tell. So basically, if there's an auto ped or an auto bicyclist, they're going to go to a trauma center, and then a motorcycle crash greater than 20 miles an hour, they go to trauma centers. So other than that, we transport according to destination policy 5050, which we'll cover at another time. Okay, that's kind of a long one, but we'll see you on the next one.